3 minutes after I landed, my phone buzzed. You are not welcome in our five-star hotel. My father had no idea he'd just banned the owner. The cold blue glow of my phone screen reflected in the lenses of my sunglasses as I stared at the message. It had arrived exactly 3 minutes after my flight touched down in Atlanta. You are not welcome in our five-star hotel. A cold smile spread across my face, one that felt unfamiliar and sharp. He thought he was banning a poor, desperate daughter from crashing his anniversary party. He had no idea he was texting the owner of the building. My fingers, steady and sure, dialed a private number. "Security," I said, my voice calm in the hushed luxury of the arrivals terminal. "Please revoke the Wellington family VIP access immediately. Their keycards stop working at midnight." My name is Nia, and at 32 years old, I am the CEO of Onyx Holdings, a private equity firm that quietly acquires luxury properties across the globe. But to my family, I am just the runaway daughter who refused to marry a man 3 times my age to save them from bankruptcy. Today, I return to the scene of my childhood trauma, not to beg for forgiveness, but to collect a debt. The automatic doors of the Royal Monarch Hotel slid open, unleashing a blast of conditioned air scented with white tea and expensive lilies. I adjusted my grip on my suitcase, the only luggage I carried. I had dressed intentionally for this moment, not in the power suits I wore in boardrooms in New York or London, but in simple jeans and a beige trench coat. To the untrained eye, I looked like a weary traveler. To anyone who knew quality, the vintage cut of the coat and the supple leather of my bag whispered a different story. But my family never knew quality. They only knew logos. I stepped onto the marble floor, my heels clicking with a rhythm that echoed the pounding of my heart. The lobby was a study in chaotic opulence. Guests in tuxedos and evening gowns milled about with champagne flutes in hand, their laughter a high, brittle sound. In the center of it all stood a massive banner. "Happy 40th anniversary, Marcus and Sylvia Wellington." My phone buzzed again in my hand, another text from my father. "Do not make a scene, Nia. Brad and his parents are here. If you step foot in this lobby, I will have you arrested for trespassing." I looked up and saw them. My mother, Sylvia, was holding court near a cascading fountain, a vision in gold-sequined gown that was fighting a losing battle against gravity. Her neck was draped in jewelry that I knew for a fact was leased. Beside her stood my father, Marcus, looking every bit the important patriarch in a tuxedo that was slightly too tight around the waist. And there was Keisha, my younger sister, the golden child who could do no wrong. She was laughing at something her husband, Brad, was saying, her hand resting possessively on his arm like he was a trophy she had won. I took a deep breath and walked toward the reception desk. I did not get more than 10 steps before my mother's gaze, sharp and perpetually scanning for threats to her social standing, landed on me. Her smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer panic that quickly hardened into rage. She excused herself from her circle of guests and marched toward me, her sequins shimmering like armor. She intercepted me before I could reach the counter, her body blocking my path with the force of a linebacker. "What do you think you are doing here, Nia?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Did you not get my father's message?" "Hello, Mother," I said calmly. "It is nice to see you too." "Don't you dare use that tone with me," she snapped. Her eyes darted around the lobby, checking to see if anyone important was watching. "You look like a stray dog. Look at you. No husband, no prospects, just dragging that old suitcase around. We are hosting Brad's family tonight, people with actual class. I will not have you ruining this night with your presence." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the same woman who had thrown my clothes onto the front lawn 14 years ago. I was 18 then. They had arranged for me to marry Bishop Green, a 60-year-old real estate developer who promised to invest in my father's failing ventures. When I refused, when I said I wanted to go to college and build my own life, my mother had slapped me and told me I was useless to this family if I could not make sacrifices. She had screamed, "Get out and do not come back until you learn your place." I learned my place, Mother, I said, my voice steady. "I am just here to check in." "Check in?" She laughed, a harsh barking sound. "This is a five-star hotel. A standard room here costs more than you make in a month, freelancing or whatever it is you pretend to do. You are here to beg for money again or to embarrass us. Well, it's not going to work." She raised her hand and snapped at a passing security guard. "You there. Escort this woman off the property. She is trespassing." The guard, a large man named Ray, who I had hired myself 6 months ago during the acquisition transition, hesitated. He looked at me, then at my mother. "Ma'am, is there a problem here?" "The problem is she is trespassing," my mother spat. Before Ray could respond, a voice dripping with condescension cut through the air. "Whoa, Sylvia, is this the famous runaway sister?" I turned to see Brad approaching us. He was tall, blond, and had the kind of face that had never heard the word no in its entire life. He held a glass of scotch in one hand and was looking at me with a mixture of amusement and disgust. Keisha was right behind him, her phone already out, recording. "So this is Nia?" Brad said, looking me up and down. "Keisha said you were difficult, but she did not mention you look so tired." "I'm just traveling, Brad," I said. "Right, traveling," he scoffed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a money clip. He peeled off 5 $100 bills and let them flutter to the marble floor at my feet. "Here, go find a motel that fits your budget. Somewhere far away from here. We are trying to have a classy evening, and you are bringing down the property value just by standing here." Keisha giggled. The camera lens of her phone pointed directly at my face. "Take it, Nia. It's more than you're worth. Brad is being generous. Don't be stupid and proud. Just take the money and leave us alone." My mother smirked, crossing her arms over her chest. "You heard them. Pick it up and get out." I looked down at the money on the floor. $500. 5 years ago, I might have picked it up. I might have cried. I might have begged them to love me. But the Naya who stood there today had a net worth that could buy and sell Brad's entire family tree 3 times over. I stepped over the money, my shoe crushing Ben Franklin's face into the polished stone. "I am not going anywhere," I said. My mother's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. "That is it. Ray, get her out of here now or I will have your badge. I am Marcus Wellington's wife and we are spending $50,000 here tonight. Move her." Ray looked uncomfortable. He took a step toward me. "Ma'am, I am going to have to ask you to leave." I did not move. I did not flinch. I simply looked past my mother's shoulder to the man in the impeccably tailored charcoal suit who had just emerged from the executive offices. Mr. Sterling, the general manager of the Royal Monarch. He had spotted the commotion, his eyes locked with mine. I saw the blood drain from his face as he recognized me. He started walking toward us, his pace urgent. "See?" my mother gloated, mistaking his approach for support. "Here comes the manager. Now you are really in trouble. You are going to be banned for life." Brad laughed, taking a sip of his scotch. "This is going to be good." Mr. Sterling stopped right in front of us. He ignored my mother, he ignored Brad, he ignored the camera and Keisha's hand. He looked directly at me, bowed his head slightly, and leaned in close so only I could hear him. "Miss Wellington," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly, "we did not expect you until tomorrow. Should I initiate the protocol?" I looked at my mother, who was grinning triumphantly, waiting for me to be dragged away. I looked at Brad, who was looking at me like I was gum on his shoe. I smiled at Mr. Sterling. "Not yet," I whispered back. "Just upgrade me to the presidential suite. And Mr. Sterling?" "Yes, ma'am." "Kill their keycards at midnight." Mr. Sterling gave a barely perceptible nod, his face a mask of professional neutrality that hid the panic I knew he was feeling. "Understood, Miss Wellington," he murmured. "I will handle it personally." I turned my back on my mother, whose chest was heaving with indignation, and on Brad, who was already reaching for another drink from a passing waiter's tray. They stood there in the center of the lobby, a tableau of arrogance and ignorance, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet had just shifted. I heard Brad's voice booming across the marble floor as I walked away. That's right. Run along now. Do not spend that 500 all in one place. Laughter erupted from their little circle. Keisha's high-pitched giggle pierced through the ambient noise like a shard of glass. She was still holding her phone up, live streaming my departure to her followers. I could imagine the caption, "Broke sister tries to crash the party." Let them laugh, I thought, the sound of their mockery fading into a dull roar as I followed Mr. Sterling toward the far end of the lobby. They did not know that I was not heading for the exit. I was heading for the private elevator bank concealed behind a wall of frosted glass and rare orchids. As we approached the secluded alcove, Mr. Sterling produced a platinum keycard. He tapped it against the reader, and the heavy grass doors slid open silently. This elevator only went to one floor, the penthouse level. I glanced back one last time before stepping inside. My parents were busy greeting a new arrival, the fake smiles plastered back onto their faces as if I had never existed. Brad was high-fiving my father, probably celebrating their victory and driving away the unwanted pest. They looked so small from this distance, so petty. The elevator doors closed, sealing out the noise, the perfume, and the toxicity of the lobby. The silence was instant and heavy. "I am terribly sorry about that display, Miss Wellington," Mr. Sterling said, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "I can have security remove them immediately if you prefer." "No," I said, watching the floor numbers climb. "Let them have their party. Let them eat my food and drink my champagne. Let them think they have won. It will make midnight that much sweeter. And Mr. Sterling," I added, fixing him with a look, "no one is to know I'm in the presidential suite. As far as the staff and guests are concerned, that room is occupied by a VIP investor from overseas. My family must not know I'm still in the building." "Of course. His privacy is paramount." The elevator chimed as we reached the top floor. The doors opened directly into the foyer of the presidential suite. It was a space I had designed myself during the renovation. 3,000 square feet of Italian marble, velvet furnishings, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. I walked to the window and looked down. Somewhere 30 floors below me, my family was toasting to their own magnificence, spending money they did not have in a hotel they did not own. I checked my watch. It was 7 p.m., 5 hours until midnight, 5 hours until their world turned dark. I poured myself a glass of water from the crystal carafe on the bar and sat down on the velvet chase. I pulled up the security feed on my tablet. I could see them in the ballroom now. My mother was showing off her ring. My father was shaking hands with investors he planned to defraud. I watched them with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing specimens in a jar. "Enjoy it while you last," I whispered to the screen, "because tomorrow you belong to me." The silence in the presidential suite was absolute, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise of the lobby below. But instead of bringing me peace, the quiet felt heavy, pressing against my chest like a physical weight. I ran my hand over the cool velvet, staring out at the city lights that blurred through my unshed tears. It was funny how you could own the building, hold the deed to the land, and have millions in the bank, yet still feel like that helpless little girl begging for a scrap of affection. My mind drifted back, pulling me into a memory I had tried to bury for a decade. I was 22 years old, standing in the kitchen of my parents' house, clutching an acceptance letter to graduate school. I had worked 2 jobs to save the deposit, eating ramen and skipping heat in the winter. I had placed the check on the counter, proud, waiting for my father to sign as a guarantor, not for the money, just for the formality. I remember the way he looked at me, not with pride, but with annoyance. He picked up the check, the money I had scraped together dollar by dollar, and tore it in half. "We need this for Keisha," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "She crashed her car again. She needs a new BMW for her image." "You know how people talk, Nia." "But Dad," I pleaded, "that is my tuition. That is my future." "You are strong, Nia," my mother had chimed in from the doorway, sipping her wine. "You know how to struggle. You are built for hardship. Keisha is delicate. She cannot handle the bus. She needs to shine. You can figure something out. You always do." They took my savings, bought my sister a car she did not deserve, and left me to drop out for a semester until I could earn it back. That was the moment I stopped being their daughter and started being their resource. They did not see a child. They saw a beast of burden strong enough to carry the weight they refused to bear. I shook my head, forcing the memory back into the dark corners of my mind. I was not that girl anymore. I walked over to the mahogany desk and opened my laptop. It was time to see exactly how deep the rot went. I logged into the Onyx Holdings secure server and pulled up the financial reports for the Royal Monarch. I typed in the name Wellington. The screen filled with red. It was worse than I thought. It was not just that they were spending money, they were bleeding the hotel dry. There were $200,000 in unpaid invoices over the last 6 months alone. Room service, spa treatments, private drivers, vintage wines, all charged to a house account that had long since maxed out. They had been bullying the previous management, using their status as locals and their loud voices to intimidate staff into comping bills they could never pay. I dug deeper, running a personal credit check on my father. It was a sea of delinquency. Their mansion, the one they were so proud of, had 3 liens on it. They were months away from foreclosure. They were not just living beyond their means. They were living in a fantasy world funded by debt and delusion. They were destitute, parading around in leased tuxedos and fake jewelry, desperate to keep up appearances while the walls closed in. Just then, my email pinged with an urgent notification from the events coordinator. It was a booking request for the grand ballroom for tomorrow night, marked high priority. I clicked it open and felt a chill run down my spine. It was a request from Marcus Wellington. He was organizing an emergency gala titled the Wellington Future Fund. Attached was a prospectus for investors. I scanned the document and my jaw tightened. It was a scam. A complete fabrication. He was selling shares in a real estate development that did not exist, using the credibility of the Royal Monarch to lure in wealthy victims. He was planning to use my hotel, my reputation, and my staff to commit grand larceny on a massive scale to pay off his debts. He was going to turn his anniversary weekend into a crime scene. I sat back, the glow of the screen illuminating my face. They were not just mean, they were criminals, and they had walked right into my trap. I look at the clock. It was 11:55. 5 minutes until midnight. 5 minutes until their access was cut. 5 minutes until the reality they had been running from finally caught up with them. The grandfather clock in the lobby chimed 12 times, its deep resonance signaling the death of the day and the birth of my retribution. From my perch in the presidential suite, I watched the security monitors as the revolving doors spun, depositing my family into the silent grandeur of the lobby. They were loud, a cacophony of drunken laughter and slurried boasts, returning from the hotel bar, where they had undoubtedly racked up another few $1,000s on a tab they had no intention of paying. My father led the pack, his arm draped heavily over my mother's shoulders, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned and disheveled. Keisha was stumbling slightly in her heels, clinging to Brad, who looked bored and irritated, his eyes scanning the room as if looking for an exit from his own life. They moved toward the private elevators that led to the VIP suites, the confidence of people who believed they owned the world radiating from them in waves. I zoomed in on the camera feed as my father pulled out his gold keycard. He waved it at the sensor with a flourish, expecting the familiar chime and the smooth slide of the brass doors. Instead, a harsh red light blinked rapidly, accompanied by a sharp tone of denial. "What is this garbage?" I heard him mutter through the audio feed. "Sylvia, give me your card. Mine is demagnetized." My mother dug into her clutch and produced her own card. She pressed it to the reader. Red light. Beep. Keisha tried hers. Red light. Beep. The laughter died instantly, replaced by a sudden tense silence. Brad let out a heavy sigh, checking his Rolex. "This is ridiculous, Marcus. Fix it. I'm tired." I watched as my father marched toward the front desk, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. The night manager, a young woman named Sarah, whom I had personally briefed hours earlier, stood behind the marble counter. She did not flinch as my father slammed his hand down on the surface. My key is not working. None of them are working. We're staying in the royal suite. Fix it immediately. Sarah typed something into her terminal, her face impassive. I'm sorry, Mr. Wellington. It appears there is a lock on your account. A lock? My father's voice echoed through the cavernous lobby. Do you know who I am? I am hosting a gala here tomorrow night. Unlock it now. I'm afraid I cannot do that, sir. The system has automatically flagged your account due to a credit issue. The card on file has been declined for the outstanding balance of $250,000. Until the balance is cleared and a new method of payment is secured for incidentals, access to the rooms is suspended. 250,000. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. My mother gasped, clutching her chest. That is impossible. Run it again. There must be a mistake with the bank. We have unlimited credit. We ran it 3 times, Mrs. Wellington. It was declined every time. I watched Brad's face on the monitor. The boredom vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. He stepped forward, pushing past my father as if he were a piece of furniture. He looked at my parents with pure contempt. You said this was taken care of, he snapped. You said the hotel was comping the suite for the anniversary. It is, my father stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. It's just a clerical error, Brad. You know how these systems are. I know that I'm standing in a lobby at midnight, unable to get into my room because my father-in-law is a fraud, he hissed. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy black titanium card. He slammed it onto the counter with a force that made my mother jump. Put it on this, he commanded Sarah. The room, the tab, everything. Just get us a working key. Brad, you do not have to do that, my mother began, reaching for his arm. Do not touch me, Sylvia, he recoiled. I am doing this because I want to go to sleep, not because I want to save you. You are embarrassing, both of you. Useless eaters pretending to be kings. He turned to Keisha, who was standing frozen, her eyes wide with humiliation. And you, he said, pointing a finger in her face, stop spending money we do not have on your parents' delusions. I am sick of bailing them out. Sarah processed the card and handed Brad 4 new keys. He snatched them from her hand, tossed 2 at my father's feet, and stormed toward the elevators without looking back. Keisha scrambled to follow him, leaving my parents to bend down and pick their keys up off the floor. Up in the penthouse, I sat in the dark, the blue light of the monitor illuminating my face. I swirled the vintage Pinot Noir in my glass, watching my parents endure the shame of gathering their dignity from the ground. They looked small, defeated, but I knew them. I knew that by morning they would have spun this into a story of victimhood, a temporary glitch in their grand destiny. They would not learn. They never learned. I took a slow sip of the wine, the rich liquid coating my tongue. Enjoy the bed Brad paid for, I whispered to the screen as they disappeared into the elevator, because tomorrow you pay the real price. This was just the appetizer. The main course was yet to come. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Royal Monarch's VIP dining room, illuminating the hand-painted silk wallpaper and the crystal chandeliers that sparkled overhead. I sat at a corner table, the best seat in the house, nursing a cappuccino and a plate of eggs Benedict topped with caviar. I had chosen my outfit with the same precision as a surgeon selecting a scalpel. A simple white silk blouse tucked into high-waisted trousers, and on my wrist, a vintage Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime that cost more than most people's mortgages. It was subtle, understated, and to anyone who knew, screamed power. I watched as my family entered the room. They looked like a parade of hungover peacocks. My mother was wearing a floral dress that was too bright for the morning light, her makeup a little too heavy, trying to hide the stress lines around her eyes. My father walked with a stiff gait, his eyes scanning the room nervously, as if expecting a bill collector to jump out from behind a potted palm. Keisha and Brad trailed behind them, looking miserable. They sat down at a large round table in the center of the room, immediately demanding attention from the waiters. I waited until they had ordered, until they had settled into their false sense of security, before I made my move. I stood up and walked toward the buffet, which was conveniently located right next to their table. As I passed them, I saw my mother's head snap up, her eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed into slits of fury. She stood up so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the marble floor, drawing the attention of half the room. She marched over to me, her face a mask of indignation. "What are you doing here, Naya?" she hissed, grabbing my arm. "How dare you sneak into the VIP lounge? This area is for paying guests only. Did you sleep in the lobby? You are going to get us all thrown out." She reached for my cup of coffee, which I had brought with me, and with a swift, violent motion, knocked it from my hand. The ceramics shattered on the floor, splashing hot liquid onto my shoes and the hem of my trousers. "Get out!" she shrieked, "before I call security myself." The room went silent. Every fork stopped midair, every conversation died. I looked down at the mess on the floor, then up at my mother. I did not flinch, I did not yell, I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out a silk handkerchief, dabbing at the spots on my blouse with slow, deliberate movements. "Mother," I said, my voice calm but carrying clearly across the silent room, "I seem very stressed. Is it because your credit cards were declined last night?" A gasp rippled through the room. My mother's face turned from red to a ghostly white. "What did you say?" she whispered. "I said," I repeated, louder this time, my eyes locking with hers, "your cards were declined, Mother. All of them, even Dad's. You could not even pay for your room. If it weren't for Brad, you would be sleeping on the street right now, so maybe you shouldn't be worrying about where I'm sleeping and start worrying about how you're going to pay for that breakfast you just ordered." My father looked like he was about to have a stroke. Keisha stared at me, her mouth agape, but it was Brad who caught my attention. He was looking at me. Really looking at me for the first time. His eyes traveled from my face down to my hand, which was still holding the silk handkerchief. His gaze stopped on my wrist. He squinted, leaning forward slightly. I saw the moment of recognition hit him. He knew watches. He knew what a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime looked like, and he knew that a woman who slept in lobbies did not wear a watch worth $3 million. His eyes met mine, wide with shock and a dawning, terrified realization. He looked at his wife, then at my parents, then back at me. The arrogance was gone, replaced with a flicker of fear. "Who are you?" he mouthed silently. I smiled at him, a cold, shark-like smile. "Just a traveler, Brad. Just passing through." I dropped the soiled handkerchief onto the table right next to my mother's plate and walked away, leaving them in the wreckage of their own humiliation. The silence followed me all the way to the door. The midday sun beat down on the turquoise waters of the VIP pool deck, but the heat radiating from the pavement was nothing compared to the fire igniting in my veins. I had come down to check on the preparations for the evening, but my attention was instantly drawn to a commotion near the private cabanas. My sister, Keisha, was lounging on a white daybed, looking like a queen who had just ordered an execution. Standing before her, trembling, was Mrs. Higgins, one of the housekeeping staff who had worked at the Royal Monarch for 20 years. She was a woman of grace and dignity, a grandmother who had put 3 children through college on her wages. But in that moment, she looked small, defeated. I watched as Keisha pointed a manicured finger at a puddle of white sunscreen splattered across the slate tiles. "You missed a spot," she sneered, her voice carrying over the gentle lapping of the pool water. "I said, clean it all. Get down on your knees." Mrs. Higgins hesitated, clutching her cleaning rag. "Miss, I have a bad knee. If I could just use the mop." "I said, get on your knees," Kesha barked. "You work for us. You do what I say. Or do I need to call my father and have you fired for incompetence?" The cruelty was breathtaking. It was not just entitled, it was evil. I saw Mrs. Higgins slowly, painfully begin to lower herself toward the hard ground, her face a mask of humiliation. I was moving before I even made the conscious decision to interfere. I crossed the distance in seconds, my heels clicking sharply on the stone. "Stand up, Mrs. Higgins," I commanded, my voice cutting through the thick, humid air. "Do not kneel for her. Do not kneel for anyone." Mrs. Higgins froze, looking up at me with watery eyes. Kesha whipped her head around, her sunglasses sliding down her nose. "You again?" she spat. "Go away, Naya. This does not concern you. The help needs to learn their place, just like you." "The help," I repeated, stepping between the woman and my sister. "This woman has more dignity in her little finger than you have in your entire body. You dropped that bottle on purpose, Kesha. I saw you. Pick it up yourself." Kesha laughed, a sound devoid of mirth. "Me? Pick up trash? I do not think so. That is what we pay people like her for, and that is what you are too, Naya. Trash. You think because you put on a nice watch you are someone special. You are just a stray dog we kicked out." She stood up then, towering over me in her platform wedges. Her face was twisted with a lifetime of jealousy and unearned superiority. "Get out of my face," she screamed. I stood my ground. "No, you are going to apologize to Mrs. Higgins, and then you are going to leave this pool area because you are disturbing the guests." Kesha's eyes went wide with rage. She drew her hand back and, before I could react, she swung. Her palm connected with my cheek with a cracking sound that silenced the entire pool deck. The sting was immediate, sharp, and hot. My head snapped to the side, but I did not fall. I tasted the metallic tang of blood where my tooth had cut my inner lip. "You are garbage," she hissed, leaning into my face. "Don't you ever try to teach me a lesson. You are nothing." I slowly turned my head back to face her. I touched my cheek, feeling the heat rising in the skin. The silence around us was heavy, suffocating. Every guest, every staff member was watching. I looked past Kesha to Mrs. Higgins, who was covering her mouth in horror. I reached out and gently took the older woman's arm, helping her stand fully upright. "I am so sorry you had to experience that, Mrs. Higgins," I said softly, my voice steady despite the throbbing in my face. "Please take the rest of the day off with full pay and report to the executive office tomorrow morning. You are being promoted to head of housekeeping staff. You will never have to scrub a floor again." Mrs. Higgins looked at me, confused but grateful. "Thank you, miss," she whispered. "But she is temporary," I said, loud enough for Kesha to hear. "She is nobody." I turned my gaze back to my sister. She was breathing hard, her hands still raised slightly, as if she might strike again. But something in my eyes stopped her, a cold promise of destruction that went far deeper than physical violence. "You will pay for that, Kesha," I said, a voice a whisper that carried the weight of a judgment. "Every single cent." I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving her standing there, fuming and impotent. As I reached the shade of the hotel corridor, I pulled out my phone. My fingers flew across the screen, typing a message to the head of the legal department. "Prepare a lawsuit against Kesha Wellington immediately. Charges include assault, battery, and workplace harassment of an employee. I want the papers served before dinner. Also, add a $50,000 penalty to their room bill for violation of the guest conduct policy." I hit send and touched my burning cheek. The physical pain was fading, but the resolve was harder than diamonds. They had made it personal. Now I would make it legal. I found a quiet alcove near the service elevators, a place where the shadows were long and the noise of the hotel was muffled. It was my sanctuary for a moment of peace before the storm. But that peace was shattered when a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. I spun around to find my father, Marcus, looming over me. His tuxedo was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot with stress and desperation. He did not look like the patriarch he pretended to be. He looked like a cornered animal. "I've been looking everywhere for you," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Where have you been hiding?" "I'm not hiding, Dad," I shrugged off his hand. "I'm working." "Working?" he scoffed. "Do not lie to me. I know you. I know you always have a stash, a little rainy day fund you keep hidden from the family. Well, it's raining. Now give it to me." "Excuse me?" "You heard me. I need $50,000. Cash, transfer, check. I don't care. I need it right now. The hotel is demanding a deposit for the ballroom tonight. They're threatening to cancel the gala if I don't pay up within the hour." I looked at him incredulous. "You want me to give you $50,000 after you banned me from the hotel? After you let your wife and daughter treat me like dirt?" "This is not about feelings. Nia, this is about survival. If this gala doesn't happen, we're ruined. Do you understand? Ruined. I have investors coming tonight, people who are going to put millions into the Wellington Future Fund. I just need the deposit to get them in the door. Once they sign the checks, I can pay you back double." The Wellington Future Fund. I repeated the name, tasting it like ash in my mouth. The fake real estate project, the one that doesn't exist. You're asking me to fund a fraud, Dad? You're asking me to be an accessory to a crime? His face went purple. Don't you dare use that word. It's not fraud. It's business. I'm building something, a legacy, and you're going to help me whether you like it or not. Now give me the money, or so help me God, I'll... He raised his hand, his fist clenched, ready to strike the daughter he had failed to protect, failed to love, failed to even see. I did not flinch. I looked him dead in the eye, waiting for the blow. Marcus, stop. The voice came from the shadows. Brad stepped into the light, his face pale, his eyes darting between me and my father. He looked different than he had at breakfast, shaken, unsure. Brad. My father lowered his hand, his bluster instantly replaced by a wheedling tone. This does not concern you. I'm just having a family discussion. It concerns me when you're about to assault a woman in a hallway, Brad said, his voice tight. And it concerns me when that woman is wearing a watch that costs more than your entire life insurance policy. He turned to me, his gaze intense, calculating. You are not just a freelancer, are you? You are not just some broke sister crashing a party. I smoothed my blouse, my expression unreadable. What gave it away, Brad? He stepped closer, ignoring my father completely. The watch, the way the staff looks at you, the way the manager came running last night. You are not here to beg, Naya. You are here to watch the show, aren't you? Who are you? He whispered, the fear in his eyes real now. Who are you really? I leaned in close, my voice a soft, terrifying secret. I am the one holding the matches, Brad, and you are standing in a room full of gasoline. An hour later, I found myself in the royal suite, not as a guest, but as a conscripted servant. My mother had cornered me near the elevators, her face a mask of desperate authority. If you want to stay in this hotel without me calling the police, she hissed, you will make yourself useful. Keisha needs an assistant for her family portrait session, and we are certainly not paying the hotel rates for a personal stylist. You will do it, and you will do it with a smile, or you will be on the street. I could have walked away. I could have revealed everything right then, but I needed more ammunition. I needed the final nails for their coffins. So I nodded and followed her into the suite where Keisha was already throwing a tantrum about the lighting. Fix my dress, Keisha, Keisha commanded, standing on a pedestal in the center of the living room. She was wearing a white gown that looked expensive from a distance, but cheap up close. Steam the train and do not look me in the eye. You're ruining the vibe. I picked up the steamer, playing the part of the obedient poor relation. As I worked around her, I noticed her purse sitting on the velvet armchair. It was an orange Hermes Birkin, the ultimate symbol of status she had been flaunting all weekend. She claimed Brad bought it for her in Paris. I moved closer, pretending to adjust a cushion. The stitching was uneven. The hardware was too shiny, gold-plated instead of solid. And there, sticking out of the inner pocket, was a sliver of a receipt. It was not from Hermes. It was a shipping invoice from a knockoff market in Guangzhou. I pulled out my phone, shielding it with my body, and snapped 3 high-resolution photos, the fake bag, the bad stitching, and the receipt. Keisha was parading around with a $50 counterfeit while treating people like dirt. It was pathetic, but it was also leverage. Just then, the glass door to the balcony slid open. Brad stepped out, holding his phone to his ear, his other hand massaging his temple. He looked stressed, the arrogance from earlier replaced by a frantic, nervous energy. He did not see me crouching behind the armchair. I waited until he was fully outside, then crept toward the sheer curtains, pressing my phone against the glass and hitting record. Babe, listen to me. I cannot talk long. The Wellingtons are driving me insane. You have no idea what I'm dealing with. No, the money is coming, I promise. The gala is tonight. Marcus is going to collect millions from these gullible investors, thinking he is saving his legacy. He paused, listening to the person on the other end, checking his watch. I know, he continued, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. They're idiots, all of them. Keisha thinks we're buying a vacation home in Aspen. She has no clue. As soon as the funds cleared the offshore account tomorrow morning, I am gone. I'm taking every dime and I'm hopping on the first flight to Rio. You and I are going to live like kings, babe. Just wait one more day. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was not just adultery, this was a confession. Brad was not just a jerk, he was the mastermind. He was planning to embezzle the funds for my father's fraudulent gala and leave my family with nothing but prison sentences and debt. He hung up the phone, looking out at the city skyline, oblivious to the fact that his exit strategy had just been captured in 4K resolution. I stopped the recording and saved it to the cloud, backing it up 3 times. I stood up, smoothing my skirt, and walked back toward Keisha, who was screaming for water. "Coming, Keisha," I called, out a genuine smile finally touching my lips, because I knew something she did not. The maid she was screaming at was about to become the executioner. I returned to the suite, my muscles aching from the hours spent steaming the train of Keisha's gown, only to find my own small rebellion hanging in tatters. My vintage silk dress, the one modest but elegant piece I had packed for the evening, lay on the bed, shredded beyond recognition. It looked like a wild animal had attacked it, clawing through the delicate fabric with savage intent. But I knew exactly what species of predator was responsible. Keisha was leaning against the doorframe with a glass of champagne in her hand and a look of mock sympathy plastered across her face. "Oh no, it looks like you've had a little wardrobe malfunction. That's a shame, Naya. We really can't have you attending the gala in jeans. You might get mistaken for the janitorial staff. Maybe you should just stay in your room and order room service. Oh wait, you can't afford that either." I picked up a strip of the ruined silk, letting it slide through my fingers. I did not cry, I did not scream. I simply looked at her and smiled, a calm, serene smile that made her frown in confusion. "You're right, Keisha," I said, my voice steady. "This dress was far too simple tonight. Thank you for helping me see that. I really should step up my game." She laughed, a nervous sound, dismissing me as delusional, and sauntered down the hall to finish her own preparations, thinking she had won, thinking she had stripped me of my dignity along with my clothing. As soon as she was gone, I picked up the suite phone and dialed a number that was not listed in the guest directory. It connected directly to the private office of the manager of the Gilded Cage, the ultra-high-end boutique located in the west wing of the hotel, a boutique that I had personally curated and stocked with the finest couture from Paris and Milan. "This is Naya," I said when the manager answered. "I have a fashion emergency in the presidential suite. Bring the entire fall haute couture collection up immediately, and bring the vault selection of diamonds. I need to be ready in 45 minutes. The response was immediate and frantic. "Yes, Miss Wellington, we are on our way." 10 minutes later, my suite was transformed into a private dressing room. 3 stylists wheeled in racks of gowns that cost more than the entire wedding budget my parents had wasted on Keisha. I ran my hands over fabrics that whispered money. Silk chiffon, hand-embroidered lace, velvet that seemed to drink the light. I bypassed the safe options and went straight for the weapon. It was a floor-length masterpiece of liquid silver chainmail and crystals, designed by a reclusive Italian couturier. It was heavy, cold to the touch, and absolutely devastating. It was a dress designed for a warrior queen, not a guest. The stylists worked in silent reverence, fitting the gown to my body as if they were armoring me for battle. They fastened a necklace of cascading diamonds around my throat, the stones cold against my skin. When I looked in the mirror, the tired freelancer was gone. The runaway daughter was gone. Staring back at me was the CEO of Onyx Holdings, a woman who could buy and sell everyone in the building. I checked the time. The gala was starting. I walked out of the suite, the silver fabric flowing around me like mercury, making a soft, dangerous sound with every step I took. The private elevator took me down to the mezzanine level, which overlooked the grand foyer outside the ballroom. My family was there, huddled together near the entrance. Keisha was preening in her white gown, posing for selfies, looking like a budget bride. Brad was adjusting his cufflinks, looking bored. My parents were nervously scanning the crowd, desperate to spot their first victim. I stepped to the railing and began to descend the grand staircase. The chatter in the foyer stopped. It rippled into silence, starting from the people nearest the stairs and spreading outward like a wave. Heads turned, eyes widened. I saw the exact moment Keisha looked up. Her smirk vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. Her eyes traveled from the hem of my gown up to the diamonds at my throat, and finally to my face. She looked down at her own dress, the one she had thought was the height of fashion, and I saw the realization hit her. Her dress was off the rack. Mine was art. I reached the bottom of the stairs and walked straight toward them, the crowd parting from me as if I were royalty. I stopped inches from Keisha, leaning in close so she could smell the custom perfume I was wearing. "You were right, sister," I whispered, my voice smooth as glass. "That old dress really was not good enough. Thank you for forcing me to upgrade." I brushed past her, leaving her standing there with her mouth open, her white dress suddenly looking very, very gray, while the photographers turned their cameras away from the host and toward the woman in silver. The private dining room was a shark tank disguised as a banquet. The air smelled of truffle oil and desperation. My father held court at the head of the table, surrounded by 5 wealthy investors he intended to bleed dry before the night was over. I sat at the far end, the silver chainmail of my dress pooling around my chair like liquid armor, reflecting the candlelight. My family had tried to banish me again, but the investors had seen me on the stairs. They had assumed I was the guest of honor, the star attraction, and my father had been forced to invite me to the table to avoid a scene. He leaned in close to Mr. Henderson, a venture capitalist with deep pockets and a trusting smile, and lowered his voice to a stage whisper, pointing a thumb in my direction. "Oh, do not mind her," Marcus said with a sad, benevolent smile. "That is Nia, a distant cousin on Sylvia's side. We took her in recently. She is a bit challenged, slow cognitive development. We dress her up and let her feel important. It is our little charity project." Mr. Henderson looked at me with pity, his eyes glazing over the diamonds at my throat, assuming they were costume jewelry provided by my benevolent benefactors. "Oh, I see. That is very noble of you, Marcus. Taking care of family is so important." I did not blink. I did not correct him. I simply picked up my water glass and took a sip, letting the condensation cool my fingertips. My father was so confident in his lie, so assured of his own brilliance, that he had made a fatal error. He had underestimated the intelligence of the woman he called slow. He placed his presentation portfolio on the side table right next to my chair. Inside were the glossy brochures for the Wellington Future Fund, the fake blueprints, and the fraudulent financial projections that he planned to present on stage in less than an hour. I waited until the waiters brought the main course, searing steaks that sizzled on hot plates. The distraction was perfect. My father was busy laughing at a joke Brad had made, clinking glasses and celebrating the money he had not yet stolen. With a movement so smooth it was almost invisible, I reached into my oversized clutch and pulled out a thin, leather-bound folder. It was identical to my father's in size and color, but the contents were vastly different. Inside my folder was the foreclosure notice, the 3 liens against his house, the credit rejection letters from every major bank in Atlanta, and the eviction notice from the hotel for non-payment. I slid my father's portfolio off the table and into my bag, replacing it with my own. The switch took less than 3 seconds. No one looked, no one saw. They were too busy looking at themselves in the reflection of the silverware. I sat back, my heart rate steady, my hands still. My father reached out without looking and grabbed the folder, tucking it under his arm. He patted it affectionately, oblivious to the fact that he was now carrying his own death warrant. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you will excuse me, I need to prepare for the main event. The gala awaits, and I promise you the presentation inside this folder will change your lives." "It certainly will," I thought, sipping my water. Just as my father turned to leave, Brad stood up. He tapped his spoon against his champagne flute, the sharp ringing sound cutting through the chatter. "Wait, Marcus. Before we go into the ballroom, I want to propose a toast." Brad looked around the table, his eyes landing on me. A cruel smile played on his lips. He raised his glass high, the bubbles catching the light. He announced, his voice booming, "To the Wellington family, to success, to legacy, and to knowing your place." He looked directly at me, his gaze traveling up and down my silver dress, sneering at the opulence he could not understand. "And to our little charity case, Nia, looking so pretty in her dress, playing pretend for the grown-ups." Enjoy the dinner, sweetheart, because once the real business starts, the kids have to go to bed. My mother laughed, a high, nervous titter. Kesha smirked, swirling her wine. Brad drained his glass and slammed it onto the table. "Showtime, everyone!" He turned his back on me, following my father out the door, believing he had just delivered the final insult. He did not know that the show had already started, and I had just rewritten the ending. The grand ballroom of the Royal Monarch was a cathedral of excess, filled with the scent of expensive lilies and the murmur of 500 wealthy guests who had come to witness the rebirth of the Wellington legacy. My father stood near the podium, adjusting his microphone, while my mother held court at the center VIP table, beaming like a woman who had just conquered the world. I sat at the edge of the table, the silver chainmail of my dress cold against my skin, watching them perform their final act. Brad sat across from me, refilling his glass with vintage champagne that he had charged to a room he could not access. He leaned back in his chair, his face flush with alcohol and arrogance. He wanted to make sure that the investors sitting with us, Mr. Henderson and his associates, saw me not as the woman in the couture gown, but as the poor relation who needed to be pitied and feared. He cleared his throat loud enough to interrupt the conversation at our table. "You know, gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying over the soft jazz music, "we have to be careful with who we let into these inner circles. Take Naya here." He pointed a finger at me, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "She cleans up nice tonight, thanks to Kesha's charity, but you should have seen her 5 years ago. We had to bail her out of county lockup." The table went quiet. Mr. Henderson looked at me with alarm, his hand instinctively moving to check his wallet. "Jail?" I asked, my voice calm, even though my pulse was hammering a war drum against my ribs. "Oh, do not play innocent," Brad laughed. "Shoplifting, was it not? Stealing lip gloss and hair extensions from the beauty supply store. Petty theft. It is sad, really. Some people just cannot help themselves. They see something shiny, and they just have to take it." It was a lie, a fabrication so absurd it should have been laughable. But in this room, among these people, perception was reality. Brad knew that if he painted me as a criminal, no one would believe me if I tried to warn them about the fraud. My mother chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sorrow. "We tried to keep it quiet, of course. We paid for the best lawyers. We tried to help her get back on her feet, but she just kept sliding back down." She sighed dramatically, wiping a non-existent tear from her eye. "It breaks a mother's heart, but we have to be honest. She is the shame of the Wellington line, a stain on our good name." The crowd erupted in laughter. It was not a warm sound. It was the sharp, jagged laughter of the elite, mocking the fallen. Mr. Henderson shook his head, looking at me with pure disgust. I looked at my father up on the stage, who was watching the scene with a satisfied nod. I looked at Kesha, who was giggling behind her hand. I looked at Brad, who was grinning like a wolf who had just cornered a rabbit. They had taken everything from me once, my tuition, my home, my dignity, and now they wanted to take my name. They wanted to reduce me to a criminal to protect their own crimes. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud break, it was the quiet, terrifying sound of a bridge burning. I stood up slowly, the silver dress flowing around me like liquid metal as every step. I picked up my crystal wine glass, the red liquid swirling inside like blood. The laughter at the table faltered as they watched me. I raised the glass high, and then with a sudden, violent motion, I smashed it against the edge of the table. The sound of shattering crystal was like a gunshot. Shards of glass flew onto the white tablecloth, sparkling in the candlelight. The wine splattered across the floral centerpiece like a crime scene. The entire ballroom went dead silent. The jazz band stopped playing. 500 heads turned toward our table. "Enough," I said. My voice was not a scream, but it projected to the back of the room, clear and cold as ice. Brad looked at me, his mouth open in shock. My mother clutched her pearls, her eyes wide. I looked at them, at the people who shared my blood but not my spirit. I gave you every chance. I gave you silence. I gave you patience. I let you have your party. I let you have your lies. But you just couldn't stop. You had to push. You had to be cruel. You have had your last chance. I continued, my eyes locking with my father's across the room. You chose cruelty. You chose to bite the hand that was willing to feed you. And now you are going to starve. My mother stood up, trembling. "Sit down, Naya. You're embarrassing us. Security, get her out of here." I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. I did not look down as I tapped a single button on the screen. The massive crystal chandeliers overhead flickered once, twice, and then died. Darkness swallowed the room. Screams of surprise rippled through the crowd. The ballroom was dead black, save for the faint glow of the exit signs. Then a mechanical whirring sound echoed from the rafters. A single high-powered spotlight clicked on. It did not shine on the stage where my father stood paralyzed in the dark. It did not shine on the VIP table where Brad and my mother cowered. It cut through the darkness, a beam of blinding white light, and landed directly on me. The beam of light followed me as I moved away from the table and toward the stage. The silence in the room was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against the eardrums of 500 guests. I walked with a slow, deliberate cadence, my silver ground shimmering like a cascade of water with every step. I did not look back at my mother or Brad. I kept my eyes fixed on my father, who stood frozen at the podium, blinking blindly into the darkness beyond the spotlight. As I ascended the stairs to the stage, the sound of my heels on the wood echoed like gavel strikes. My father stepped back, his microphone drooping in his hand. His face was a mask of confusion and rising panic. "Naya," he hissed, his voice barely audible over the hum of the ventilation system. "Get down from here. You are ruining everything. The security team is on their way." I reached out and took the microphone from his trembling hand. He was too shocked to resist. I stood center stage, looking out into the black void where the audience waited. I motioned to the tech booth in the back, a subtle signal I had arranged hours ago with the head of AV. "Lights," I said softly. The house lights came up slowly, illuminating the sea of faces. They were staring at me with a mixture of awe and confusion. Mr. Henderson was leaning forward in his chair, his eyes narrowed. My father lunged for me, but I stepped aside and he stumbled, catching himself on the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice calm, authoritative, the voice of a woman who controlled billions. "I apologize for the interruption. My father, Marcus Wellington, was about to present you with an opportunity. He was about to show you the future of the Wellington legacy." I paused, letting the tension build. "But I think there has been a mistake with the presentation files. Allow me to correct it." I pulled the remote clicker from my father's pocket. He grabbed for my wrist, but I was faster. I pointed the remote at the massive LED screen behind us and pressed the button. The logo for the Wellington Future Fund vanished. In its place, a high-resolution legal document appeared. It was crisp, clear, and undeniable. At the top, in bold black letters, it read, "Deed of Ownership." Below that, the Royal Monarch Hotel Group, and below that, in a signature that spanned the width of the screen, was a name that made the entire room gasp. Naya Wellington, CEO, Onyx Holdings. The sound that ripped through the ballroom was not applause. It was the sound of 500 people inhaling at once, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. I watched the realization ripple through the crowd like a shockwave. They looked from the screen to me, then to my father, and finally back to me. The connection was made. The woman in the silver dress was not a charity case. She was the landlord. I turned to look at my family. My father was staring at the screen, his mouth opening and closing, no sound coming out. His face had gone the color of old ash. He looked like a man who had just watched his own funeral. My mother had collapsed into her chair, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it looked like madness. She was shaking her head slowly, over and over, as if trying to deny the reality that was looming over her in 40-foot letters. And then there was Brad. He was standing by the table, his face slack. The glass of vintage champagne he had been holding slipped from his fingers. It fell in slow motion, hitting the floor with a wet shatter that seemed deafening in the silence. He didn't even look down. He was staring at me with the look of a man who realized he had just bet his life on a losing hand. I turned back to the microphone, my eyes sweeping over the investors, who had been moments away from writing checks to a fraud. "My name is Naya Wellington," I said, my voice ringing with the finality of a judgment. "I am the founder and CEO of Onyx Holdings. I own this hotel. I own the land it sits on, and I own the debt that paid for the champagne you are drinking." I pointed at the screen, then at my father. "This man does not have a project. He does not have a fund, and he certainly does not have your money. This gala is not an investment opportunity. It is a lie, and it ends right now." I looked at Mr. Sterling, who was standing by the main doors with a team of security guards. "Turn on the lights, Mr. Sterling. The party is over."